Everybody, this is Joe Turner with the City Manager Unfiltered podcast, and this interview with Audree Guzman is part 2 in the series. It features adult content. We talk about things like child sexual abuse, domestic violence, mental health issues, and suicide, eating disorders. Please exercise discretion while listening to this episode. It's not suitable for children or the workplace, but it's obviously a very important subject matter, and I hope you get some value out of it. Before we jump into that interview, I want to give you a quick update on the James Freed versus ICMA defamation lawsuit because things really blew up last week. On Thursday the 5th, James Freed put out his first sort of public statement since he'd been on the podcast and done a couple interviews way back last year. And in that email statement, he also included a 20-page court filing. The email statement said that James Freed was not going to accept any settlement from the ICMA unless it included a full retraction and apology by the organization, and he also stated that he had already turned down a large money settlement offered by the ICMA. So he basically put a line in the sand saying, hey, I'm not taking any offer from the ICMA unless they fully retract and apologize for the public censure. So that was really interesting. Then the 20-page court filing had some bombshells in it, and I've posted about it over on my LinkedIn account as well as on citymanagernews.com. Some of the main takeaways on there is that there are deposition testimonies provided by ICMA staff and executive board members that confirm that no investigation was done into the facts or claims made by James Freed when he appealed his censure. You have Mark Ott and staff confirming that the rules of procedure were not followed. And although James Freed has alluded to it in the past in my interview with him last year, there is a citation of a deposition statement whereby Jessica Cowles confirms that her staff report to the CPC back on the very first ethics investigation in 2018, early 2019, did not match or reconcile with the conversation that was recorded by James Freed for that same case, meaning that what she reported to the CPC was inaccurate at best or intentionally deceitful at worst. And there's a bunch of other stuff. But again, I document this in detail over at citymanagernews.com. I've created a reference page with a bunch of stories and articles that I'm building out over time. And so I invite you, if you want to learn more about what's going on with the James Freed lawsuit, you need to go check it out. I have spoken with James Freed, and we are going to shoot to do a podcast interview for next week. On the 18th, we're going to release it. Hopefully, if we can get this thing recorded in time, we got to get our schedules aligned, but we're trying to get this thing recorded and put out before the ICMA conference in Pittsburgh, and I'm shooting for Wednesday the 18th, so be on the lookout for that. This will be the second time that James Freed has been on the program, and we are marching towards trial, which is slated for October 29th of 2024. We are less than 2 months away from the trial, and things are starting to heat up. And it's only going to get more and more intense from here unless or until the ICMA settles with James Freed and meets his demands. Because he's been persecuted and done wrong by the ICMA ethics staff. And I got to tell you, the more and more I examine this, the more it is an indictment on the failed leadership of ICMA CEO Mark Ott, who has allowed this to take place under his watch. Not only has he allowed the weaponization of the Code of Ethics to go after and target a fellow city manager, he has rewarded those who have done wrong. And I'm speaking of Perego and Cowles. So on that note, we're going to jump into part 2 of the interview with Audree Guzman. About 4 minutes in to this interview, there's going to be a little bit of a hiccup because we had some conversations that essentially included another person. And to respect their privacy, I've edited out some content. And so about 4 minutes and 20 seconds in, it gets a little bit clunky. But the short of the story is that Audree Guzman and her mother, along with someone else, were having a conversation when Audree learned and shared with her mother that she believed that she had been abused when she was around 5 years of age. So, you touched on the home life situation there a little bit, Audree, and I know we've talked about in our pre-interview sort of screening calls and discussions about some of the other challenges you've faced in your life and your career, and that's overcoming abuse and some of the difficulty in a challenging home environment. Why don't we unpack that a little bit as you feel comfortable?
Yeah.
Because I've shared in a previous episode or two, I think particularly the one with Stephen Wade, the former Topeka, Kansas city manager,
Yeah.
about some experiences I've had with sexual abuse and trauma as a child, and you've encountered some similar situations on in your life, and obviously it's impacted you, and I mean it's impacted me, and obviously it's a very traumatic thing. So why don't you unpack a little bit so you can kind of give the audience a little understanding of your background and the challenges you had to overcome, and how that, and maybe we can sort of roll out how that's impacted you to this day.
Yeah. So I think I've probably checked off every box that you could check off as far as like the types of abuse that one could go through and maybe the mental aspects that one could go through. I was very moved by the Topeka City Managers podcast, and it wanted me to come on here also because I think we do as um, city managers kind of have that lack of privacy. And I wanted to share my stories that way people didn't feel so alone and maybe they could get the help that they needed before it's too late or early enough on. Um, so, like the preset of our family dysfunction, if you will, um, my uncle on the day I was born, actually, within like minutes, he committed suicide, which was my mom's brother. And so I share that date with him. And
Yikes.
then so just from the get-go,
Yeah,
from the second I was born,
that's a
anyway.
rough deal. So your mother is giving birth to our baby,
Yeah.
and she learns shortly as that happens that she's lost her brother due to suicide.
Yeah, my mom had found out within 30 minutes. I know it's within 30 minutes of giving birth to me, which was her first child, that her youngest brother committed suicide.
Wow.
It was like around the same time. So I was born at like 2 in the morning. So it was summer time around there as far as exact timeline. And so she was under a lot of stress, so much so that my full name was supposed to be Audrey Danielle Rose. And she had forgot to put Rose on my birth certificate because of all of that. So
Oh man.
yeah, I changed it when I got married because it was just something I always wanted to do. I was always referred as that. Anyway, I
Wait.
digress.
So you changed your name to reflect the second middle name?
I did. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
it's now legally Audrey Danielle Rose. I was always called that, and I had knew the story, but I made the change legally
That's
too.
awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
So my alma mater, my respects, I guess, to that. That's just kind of like the start of it. When to get into more like the actual abuse that I started from very early age, at the age of 3, I was molested by my brother. Um,
What do you mean? You said you were the
Oh,
firstborn or what?
yeah. So, my dad has 2 sons in a previous marriage,
Got you. Okay.
and both of my older brothers, they were like 2 and 3 whenever he married my mom. So, and the mom had lost rights. So my mom completely raised my older brothers. They were
Okay.
just as much as a full sibling. I didn't even count them in as half siblings, even though
Got you.
they
Got you.
actually technically are. So anyway, I was molested by one of my brothers whenever I was 3 years old. And my memories from it's very, very, very vague. But what I do know is it was never really talked about growing up and it was always swept under the rug. So much so that I did have memories of it kind of growing up, but I thought I was making it up. I didn't know if it was a memory. I didn't know if it was something I was making up or a movie. I had no idea that it was real. And my mom comes outside. She's like, "What is going on? Why are you crying?" And I'm like, "Well, pretty sure that I was when I was younger, but I don't really know." And she's like, "Oh my God, you remember that?" And I'm like,
What?
"Oh, what? You know?" And she's like, "What do you remember?" And so without getting into graphic detail, I kind of told her like what I remember. And I'm like, "I don't know. I just remember this and this." And I was like, I don't know, 4 or 5 years old. She's like, "Well, actually, you were 3." And I just like dropped to my knees. Like my whole body went weak and I'm like complete sobbing hysterical cuz like my whole body or my whole life was felt like a lie at that point cuz my
Right.
parents knew about it. It was never talked. It was something that I had still remembered. Obviously it was enough to traumatize me and I would been growing up with it for 21 years. Like I'm 21 years old at this point. And and so yeah, that's the big first one. that, um, I don't know if you want to call it, set the stage for my childhood home.
Oh, okay. So, well, wow, there's a lot to unpack there, Audrey. So, your mother knows obviously that you were molested by
Mhm.
your sibling, and she, uh, I'm not trying to give her the benefit of the doubt or whatnot, but apparently, I think she tried to roll with the punches, so to speak, and sweep it under the rug because this happened to you at such a young age, and thought that you really didn't know what was going on, and therefore let's just like, I guess, ignore it. I guess I don't know.
Yeah, my mother is she's narcissistic. She is a cluster B of the personality disorders. And so I grew up in a very dysfunctional home as far as my mother, and very abusive. And so I'm not at all surprised by her
Okay.
response now that I know more about her own mental challenges, if you will. Um,
So
yeah,
so okay, so when you're going through this, I want to give you take a beat here. Unpacking my situation a little bit,
yeah.
okay? Because I was molested at around the age of, I was in seventh grade, seventh, eighth grade, something like that. So I was probably like around 11, 12, something along that lines.
Oh,
Much
wow.
more, much more aware and conscious of what's
Yeah.
going on, obviously, than being 3 years old, right? And it's a completely different dynamic. So when you were molested at 3, but you weren't really consciously aware of it, and like you thought there was something that had happened to you, but you weren't sure, right?
Hmm.
Did consciously it doesn't necessarily consciously it doesn't seem like the abuse had a direct impact on you. It was more of the dysfunction on all the other stuff with your mother that probably had a greater impact on you during your childhood, if that makes sense what I'm saying, right? Or do you think there was some subconscious impact from the abuse that you wrestled with through your adolescence?
I don't think from that specific instance it created a whole lot of consequences other than the fact that I there's a few times during my childhood whenever other friends had gone through a situation and I'm like, "Oh yeah, I think maybe that happened to me." But I felt like I was lying to them.
Yeah, yeah.
I guess that was
Or
like
almost disingenuous for because like, "Oh, I don't wanna minimize." Oh, because almost like if it didn't really have a huge impact on you, it's like, "What can I really share with you?"
well
Right? And
and even then I didn't know it was real. I just thought I was like
yeah.
making it up. So, I always thought I was lying whenever I'd be like, "Oh yeah, that happened to me," but I thought I was lying. So that's the biggest impact. I had many other like abuses that involved like sexual things, one with the other brother when I was like 16. And those things have, yes, very much impacted me. But as a 3-year-old thing, like your long-term memory is like just kind of starting to develop. And so I don't feel like mine impacted me as far as trauma as much as probably yours did.
Well, that's interesting. Oh man, this is such a difficult topic to really, you know, I don't mind talking about it because I'm an open book. I just don't know how to sometimes explain it in ways that I feel
The general
is
public would understand.
well, and also appropriate, like,
Oh yeah.
in terms of, because this is gonna sound really weird, and maybe not, I don't know. Like, I was abused and there was an impact on me, but I also feel, and my wife would probably disagree to some extent because, talk about therapy, we can go on for
Yeah.
this for hours, but, um I really felt like I handled the abuse generally well. Like, I'm not saying I was unscathed in any stretch of the imagination. I think it led to me having some anger issues as a youth and being pretty pissed off and wanting to rage out against stuff, and so there were some things in that nature. Um, but overall, I feel like I've processed it really well. I just feel like I'm just an absolute just tank, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And what have you. And I know I'm sure I've probably buried some stuff deep down or what have you, but I feel generally, and it's interesting because, kind of how you said you felt like you were maybe lying.
Hmm.
Um, I sometimes feel like I don't want to talk about it because I don't necessarily feel like it had a huge, huge impact on me,
Hmm.
and I don't want to somehow feel like I'm marginalizing or minimizing
Oh
what other
yeah.
people are feeling because of the impact they've had. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, I
And
totally
s-
understand.
and so it's like that's where I struggle because I don't want to dump on somebody else or make I don't want to compound what someone else is feeling by making it sound like, oh well, it didn't really impact me. You know what I'm
Hmm.
saying?
Well, and the whole reason I wanted to come on in here is so that we, at whatever level of impact it made to you, it still made an impact, and
Absolutely.
it was still something traumatic that you had to experience that you should have never had to go through. It's not normal, and it's not something that everyone goes through, and it's not something that you should minimize because it did impact you.
Yeah.
And that's the whole reason I want to come on here to talk about like the different levels of trauma and abuse, and I want people to not be afraid to talk about it and not be afraid to get the help that they need. So, yeah, I totally understand what you're saying.
So were you earlier a moment ago? It's almost like you alluded to almost a second episode of sexual abuse with as a
Yeah.
teenager or something, or what happened
Yeah.
there?
So, well, I think it would be more appropriate to talk about my mother slightly
Okay.
first, but and she was very abusive physically and mentally to us growing up, like, so much so on a regular basis. It was like she would completely deny us, like, "Oh, I don't love you. You're not my child. You need to go to your dad for anything." I When my little brother, which is the last of the siblings, was born, he was, I don't he's probably 6 months old, and, like, I was holding him, and he was bouncing, and he hit his head on the coffee table, and my mom, like, comes and grabs him, and she starts kicking me and punching me, and I'm, like, I don't know how old I'm probably, like, 11 at this age,
Jeez. Wow.
and I'm just curled up in a ball, and my mother's kicking and punching me, and then when she finally stops, I just ran into my room and just kinda cowered down in there, and so just so from that event, you can kinda get a picture of the kind of mother that I grew up with.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think that sets the stage, and which is why I wanted to talk about it on some of the other abuses that I experienced because abuse was so normalized in my home.
Do you mean abuse perpetrated against you by other people because they've
Yeah.
seen almost because you've almost been if you're treated like shit by somebody, right?
Yeah.
Then other people are going to start treating you like shit because it's just sort of right. Is that kind of like what you're
Well,
talking?
no, I think if you are treated like absolute dog shit and then somebody else treats you like dog shit, you don't know that it's dog shit because all you know is dog shit.
Oh, no, no, okay, yeah, I'm tracking you there, but what I
Yeah.
was trying to get to is, do you feel like the other abuse that was perpetrated against you by other individuals in the household was a result of your mother, who obviously is supposed to be the person that's supposed to value you the most, right? Because she
I
almost does
I
like
think
does she open the door to other people to abuse
I
you
s-
because she treats like crap?
I certainly think so for my siblings, mainly for my older brothers, and more so because we were the younger punching bags, if you will. But I don't think it was so much like because I get treated like crap from someone, then other people are seeing that, and it's an open door and open invitation to continue to treat me that way. I don't think it was so much that, but yeah, more of an outlet, if you will.
So and I don't want to short circuit the conversation. It's awkward for me to be in this position because I don't necessarily want to push you down to talk about things that you don't
No,
feel
you're
comfortable talking about. Okay. So like how do you navigate these situations? I mean, you're just a kid, right?
yeah.
And I'm dealing with some things as a kid too. And man, shout out to all the kids who are shout out to all the people who are listening who went through some traumatic stuff as kids
Yeah.
because man, you have to be a particularly special person to endure some of the things that we endure and yet still kind of come out the other side like
I
okay, you know what I mean? It's like I mean, it's crazy some of the stuff that we go through as kids and you
mm,
know, I have a little bit of a rant. It always boggles my mind, Audrey, how in our society we talk about time and time again about how we need to protect our children and we need to take care of our children. And yet, time and time again, you see children exposed to these abuses, right?
oh,
And we have like, I don't want to get super political, but we just had like the whole Me Too era, right? Back in like 2016 and 17 when it came to women being treated poorly by men and, we see this time and time again with how we respond to the institutions that are complicit in sort of allowing these abuses to happen. And I don't want to go in a rant on like the Boy Scouts or the Catholic Church or anything like that.
hmm
But for some reason, and I assume it's just because it's so distasteful and because people just have a hard time wrapping their heads around it. They just want to bury their head in the sand. I don't understand why so often we allow children to get abused and we act like it's not really happening, or we just pretend like it didn't happen. Like, you know what I mean? It just really
Yeah.
boggles my mind.
I just I don't know. I don't think I have a perfect answer to that. It's sad and it's unfortunate.
It really pisses me off, and it's just
Yeah.
like, I just, because it's the most innocent people, defenseless people in our entire
Yeah.
society, and it's like, if you can't, I don't know. And like in my situation, I'll give you, I've never shared this with anybody, but I'll um,
That's why we're on here.
I know. There's things about this I never, like, for example, I never talked about my sexual abuse until after my mom passed away. So, you know, my mom made poor life decisions that put me in a situation where I was molested. And my mom became a born again Christian. She was a drug addict, her and my stepfather, and they went to prison and they became evangelical Christians, born again, and all that stuff. And my mom went through the whole, mm, uh, the whole conversion experience, right?
Mhm.
And and she made amends. I forgave her and my stepfather, and like, she was amazing. Like, it was a true forgiveness deal where I never threw anything in her face. I never, even if I got mad about something as a teenager. So, man, this conversation is a little bit kind of like unwieldy here. So, my around the time that I was in junior high, like sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth grade, my mom was all messed up, and that's when I was living with family members and guardians and what have you. And it was during one of these stints that I was living with a guardian in
Mhm.
their household, and that's when I was the abuse took place, and the guardian's adult son was living with them. Okay, so
Mhm.
I was living with a husband and wife, and the adult son was living in the household. He was about 21 or so at the time, and I'm around 11 or 12 or whatever. And
Mhm.
that's when the abuse started. And my brother
Oh.
was living with me too, with us. So this guardian took in both my brother and I, and so I had to go through the situation of, okay, one is, I'm not even sure how I can even, where do I go if I want to leave here? I'm being abused, but where do I even go? Who do I tell? Do I even want to tell anybody? Or that whole deal. That's
Oh, yeah.
a whole thing, right? And then I'm the older brother, and I'm worried about my younger brother and also just us being together. So if I leave, like, what just happens to him, or does he stay in the environment, or that whole deal.
Yeah.
So it was a very crazy journey. And in ninth grade, I was a freshman in high school, and I was going to Corona High School in Southern California at the time. And I just reached my breaking point. I couldn't do it anymore. And my mom and my stepfather, they'd been reaching out to me through this whole born again process of trying to get me to come back to live with them
Oh.
and what have you. And it was a journey just to get to that point, right? Because when someone's a drug addict, they don't just get rehabilitated
Oh
the first
my
go, right?
gosh.
So
No.
it's like, I'm like, okay, is this legit, and all this other stuff, and I wasn't sure. And so anyway, I just reached the breaking point, Audrey. I just couldn't do it anymore, and I
How old are you at this, like, point?
so I would have been, like I said, freshman in high school, so I'm probably 13-ish, I guess, or something like that.
Yeah.
And
My breaking point was when I was a sophomore, so
yeah, I just wanted out, and I
Oh.
just couldn't do it. And so I went to go live with my mom and my stepdad, and like I said, we went through this. They went through the born again experience, and I forgave them, and I never threw it in her face. I never, if I got mad or whatever, as a teenager, as a teenager in high school,
Yeah.
never threw it in her face. It was always just never spoken of. I basically said, "Hey, it's over. We put it behind us," and what have you. That was a little bit of a rambling deal, but the reason why I brought this whole thing up and I missed the main point was is that when I was living with the guardian, the husband and the wife and the adult son, in the act of sort of being, not in sort of, I was being molested at the time in the actual act, because we were staying in the same room, which was weird in and of itself, right? It
Yeah,
just
no
was, it was,
kidding.
I could, the dysfunction of this household was just unbelievable, but it was all I had essentially. And I remember the mother walking in on her adult son and me, kind of in this weird compromising position in bed. Okay, and
Mhm.
I'll put it that way, right?
Yeah.
And it was like one of those deals where like we both sort of like nobody wanted to speak of it, right? So it's like, had you not know, right? It's something weird, and she just sort of like closed the door and left, and it was like never spoken of again.
Oh
You know what
my
I mean?
gosh,
It's
yeah.
yeah, it's just it's just crazy, and it's like people just don't want to see it, or they don't want to deal with the consequences of it, and yet children get repeatedly victimized over and over. It's just sad, and
It's
it's really makes me angry.
it's sad because it's easier for them just to ignore it than deal with it and do something about it,
Yeah,
which that's
yeah.
sad that that's the reality.
Yeah, yeah. And so, so for me, and if there's I have a really complicated relationship with religion, and Christianity and stuff. And it's
As
like,
do
I've
I.
talked about, yeah. So, so it's like, I've talked about a little bit on the podcast before, and I'm very much I'm not what I would consider myself a believer or a practitioner, faith, whatever. But I'm not anti-Christian. I don't
Mhm.
have any resentment towards it. I don't, recoil at the conversations. In fact, I like to bring people on and give them the opportunity to talk about their faith, because I'm very receptive to it, and I want to give people a platform to talk about things that are important to them. But I do think that in many ways, the fact that my parents went through this conversion experience and legit, like, authentic contrition and this redemption and forgiveness, I think it really helped me heal quite a bit throughout this whole process. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think it's kind of beautiful because there's a lot of kids that might not ever get that, which I think it's beautiful that you had the opportunity to re-heal and amend that. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I totally 100% related with trying to find an out because that's how I found myself in my next abusive relationship.
Is that because you basically fled the house and into a relationship with somebody who was abusive then, right? Because then the
Oh
cycle
yeah.
perpetuates itself. Okay.
Oh yeah.
So once you walk us through that, so obviously you're in a situation at home where you're being treated like shit by your mother. You're being treated like shit by your siblings. You probably the only decent relationship you have is probably with your younger sister, I would
Mhm.
imagine, similar to my situation that I just unpacked for you a little bit,
Yeah.
right? And you must have also been facing the challenge. Okay, what do I do? Do I leave this
Yeah.
household and try to get some freedom and free myself from the burdens of this whole horrendous experience? And then you might have had some guilt with the whole leaving your sister behind, I'm sure. I don't know. Why
Oh
don't you unpack
yeah.
this?
That's exact and my little brother. Yeah, that's exactly what I was 16 years old when I started dating what is now my ex-husband. And that's exactly what I was trying to find. I was trying to find an out to get out of my house. I'd actually went and seen an attorney to try and get emancipated, but I didn't have the means or the funds to do that. So that was a quick ex-nay. And so nothing better than a older guy who has his own house. And at that point in time, I didn't know he was abusive. And so I moved out like 2 weeks before my 18th birthday, and I moved in with him. And
You must have been so excited.
oh yeah, well
You must have been like, yeah,
I it was like a kick rocks mom. Like
yeah. I'm gonna show
um
you. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. Cuz as I was leaving, it's like, "Oh, you're going to be a bum on the streets. You're going to not even finish cuz I still had to finish my senior year of high school. You're not going to finish high school. You're going to be pregnant before you graduate." Like just the constant like you're going to be a complete failure. And not to get too far off the topic, but I think about one of the things that you were talking about earlier of how you feel like you dealt with it really well. We didn't become a statistic. Like I want to say that I'm also proud of myself because I'm not like homeless and I'm not um hooked on drugs and I haven't been. I didn't become the statistic.
right.
I knew that I had to do something to make myself deep independent from these people who are abusing me. And so I think that's probably part of the reason why I did not become one. But anyway, to get back to that. So I moved in with the boyfriend at
And how old is he
17.
at the time?
He's 32.
Oh wow,
Yeah.
that's definitely. A lot of red flags there, right, Audrey?
Oh, yeah.
They looked
Uh,
like green flags at the time for your based on your situation, but I mean,
oh,
looking
yeah.
back now, there's a lot of red flags there. 32 and
Oh
a
my god.
17-year-old.
Yeah,
Oh,
it'll probably look like the Kentucky Derby with as many, like, red flags that are being thrown out there. But, yeah, so yes, he I moved in, and again, no, like, real big, like, no physical threats, should I say. I'm sure there was all the red flags that could have been possibly available prior to, but what do I do? Stay at home and continue to be abused by my mother, or take this chance and at least I can, like, drink with this dude and stay up as long as I want, and no stupid rules at mom and dad's house that
right.
I'm also being abused at, so it's like, what's the lesser of the two
No risk.
evils?
Yeah, so yeah, it's basically the only upside, right? I mean,
Yeah. So, like, I don't even think it was a full month after I had moved in with him. He, was an alcoholic, and when he would get drunk is whenever he would become extremely abusive. And my very first occurrence that I got to enjoy, if you wanna say that, was I wanna say, like, a month after I moved in with him.
yikes.
And so he's in a titsy about something. I don't remember exactly what, but I'm standing against the fridge in the kitchen, and that's where we're having the argument. And he grabs a knife and he stabs the fridge right next to my head. Um, and then chases me out of the house with the knife. And so that whole relationship was that his knife was his the knives were his weapon of choice, and what I would say tormenting me. I wouldn't use any other word than torment because it was always something similar to that. The most extreme was about halfway through the relationship, so probably about 5 years into the relationship, whenever he wrecked my vehicle intentionally. And I was not at home when this happened, I was at work. And he wrecked my vehicle intentionally, and then he cut his hand, and just like splattered blood all over my house. Like, it looked like a murder scene when I got home. Again, so I had 9 years of that,
So
and
roughly some 17 to 26 years of age, you're dealing with this?
yeah, and so
26, you're just still a baby at 26. I mean,
I started working for the city of Lyons whenever I was 20. So,
oh, wait. Hold on a second. Let's unpack that.
yeah.
So earlier you talked about John Sweet taking you under his wing, right?
Mhm.
So he's mentoring you during this whole time.
Oh, yeah, yes.
Did you ever confide with him, or did you just sort of wall that off and compartmentalize that part of your personal life from him?
I don't know that I ever really confided in him. I think he was very much aware of what was happening. John was a very, very intelligent individual, and
Yeah.
some of those altercations that involved police with my ex, was obviously the city of Lyons Police Department.
Oh, because
Or
you were living in Lyons proper.
or a portion
Uh,
of that, I was living
oh,
in Lyons, and
okay.
then the other part I was always in the same county, so the other part of it was the Rice County Sheriff's Office.
Oh,
Um, so
yeah.
yeah, it does create a lack of or sense of privacy, because also during that period, those 9 years, and both times while I was actually working for the city of Lyons, I did try I had 2 suicide attempts, and the the last of the 2, the sheriff's office, the police were there at my house, and so they took me to the jail to have the mental evaluation.
Right.
Um, and so everyone knows I work for the city of Lyons, and the job that I had was very, like, very high profile. I was
Yeah.
very involved with the public, and so yeah, it made it very difficult to, I feel, for myself anyway, for my own journey, yeah, to feel like you kind of had that sense of privacy. Again,
Yeah.
though, on the flip side, I feel like I had very great support from the community. And I probably had, I don't want to say an advantage on the access, but I was aware of the access to resources where others who are not in that profession may not even know that those resources exist. So I think it both has its negatives and its positives to it.
Yeah, that's a blessing and the curse of living in a small town, Kansas,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
and now that we're unpacking your story, because I didn't realize the whole Lions connection before we jumped on to this interview, I can see how maybe the Lions City Administrator gig is not at the top of your list of maybe what.
Honestly, I don't
But
have a whole lot of, like, negatives about that, but yeah, I the very last attempt that with my ex and, like, like the whole knives and that kind of situation. The last meltdown was actually within 3 or 4 months of me leaving the city.
Uh-huh.
So fairly like 4 years ago. And I was supposed to go to a Chamber of Commerce meeting. It was our annual banquet, and so was he because he was working for a business that like was heavily involved into the community. So he was going to go also,
Oh,
and
really? Okay. All
yeah,
right.
he ended up not going. And like fast forward, I got home. He was not home, and he was drunk driving my one of my vehicles. He had 3 DUIs already prior to this, and so another altercation happened, and it involved him pinning me down with a knife on the couch multiple times before I could escape. And then the very next day, I walked in to work, and my office is the very first office as you walk into the city hall. And the cashier there, who I'm really good friends, like I would almost call her another mother. She's one of my very close friends. I was confiding in her, and she's like, Audrey, you need to tell the chief. You need to do something, and you need to like file a PFA and get him out of your house, and for good. Like stop going back.
Right.
Like just end the cycle." And so I don't even want to say, it was like 15 minutes after me and her were talking, and I went back in my office, and she's like calling to the chief. She's like, "Justin, I think Audrey needs to talk to you." And
So she initiated it for you to
oh,
basically.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, okay.
And so he comes in and he's like, "Did it happen again?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it did." He's like, "You're gonna do something about it this time?" And I'm like, "Yep, and I'm ready." And so went through the process of filing the PFA, which was like my third PFA that I'd gotten from him. And I was
Were
all
you
the other
did you pull the other ones? Did you
Yeah, I
resend them
did.
or okay,
Yeah,
okay.
I did.
Yeah.
And I was gonna follow through, and I did. And so this was like a Tuesday night when all this happened. I could not go back to my home, which is where he was staying at the time. So
Right.
I was staying with a friend for the few days, and it was either Friday or Thursday that the PFA was gonna be approved and signed by the judge. And so they gave me the okay to go back home, and he had gotten all his stuff and was removed from the residence. And then noon on Friday, I got a call from his boss that he's like, "Do you know where he's at?" I'm like, "Nope, haven't talked to him since Tuesday whenever all that went down." And he's like, "Well, he never showed up." Well, he took a bus to Mexico and never seen him again.
Really?
Yeah. So,
Well,
yeah, that
good.
yeah, I mean, I guess
Good.
that it ended itself well, I think, in
Yes.
the aspect, which is, and that's kind of the other reason why, aside from getting my master's degree, of moving so far away, I'm like, there's so
You need a
many
reset.
memories.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
no, yeah, I totally get
Yeah.
it. No,
Yeah, there's
totally,
so many
absolutely.
memories. Everything, like everything is got a memory attached to it. It's 9 years of my life. My whole life was there. Like that's where I grew up and raised. Just too many, I think, negative memories. And so yeah, that's
So, I can guarantee with absolute certainty that there is a woman listening to this podcast somewhere who is going through a domestic violence situation, right? We can almost guarantee that, right?
oh yeah.
And I know it's so cliche. It's so cliche to say, if you could help one person, it's all worth it or
Oh
whatever,
yeah.
right? And so that one person is listening right now, Audrey. That one woman who's listening, going through domestic violence, going through a terrible situation. What advice would you give her on taking action?
First off, I just wish I could give her a hug and tell her she's not alone. And all these like worries of I can't make it, I can't pay the bills. I'm trying to raise these kids. All the what ifs that keep popping in your head. I promise you that the what ifs and the uncertainty of those what ifs are nothing compared to what you're going through right now. The pain, the suffering, the fear, the terror, all of those things don't compare to the what ifs. What if you can make it? What if you don't get another chance? I think there was too many what ifs for me. What if this is the last time it happens? And what if my family's planning a funeral for me? Um, so if I could give you any advice at all, stop worrying about the what ifs of when you get out, and stand up for yourself, because you deserve to be treated like a human being and with respect and love and dignity just as much as anyone else. I want to repeat that. You deserve that. You deserve to be treated with respect and dignity just as much as anyone else.
Amen.
So that would be the little bit of advice. And there's resources everywhere. Get to your local shelter or advocate. The local advocate was actually the wife of one of our police officers. Her name is Cami Ryan, and she's in Lyons, and she was doing that up until about a year ago. And I would not honestly. She would drive me to the group meetings, and they would have a therapist there, and so I don't think I would have. I don't know if I would have actually been able to get out if it wasn't for some of the interventions with the resources and my connection to them. So find those resources, and you can do it.
Do you
Whether you,
mind?
yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, go
Go ahead.
ahead. I'll say you can do it whether you're a female or whether you're a male. I think men and women both go through these, and don't be ashamed by it. Get the help that you need.
Do you mind sharing the name of the lady, the receptionist at Lions who
Yeah.
called the sheriff? Like, I think she played a pivotal role in changing your life. It sounds like.
Debbie Metzger, and I love Debbie dearly, and she is honestly like another mama to me.
Shout out to Debbie.
Yeah, I love Debbie. I think anybody that meets Debbie loves Debbie.
She might have saved your life.
I think she did. I think her and that chief, I think Cami Ryan, the advocate, I think a lot of people helped. Yeah. So I think all of them in our local law enforcement, all of those guys.
Thank you, Debbie. Man, that's awesome, man.
Yeah.
Because I can't even imagine being in a woman's shoes in a situation like that and having to make that call or trying to make the call or weigh the pros and cons of trying to free yourself from an abuser, right? Because all the unknowns that you just talked about, especially when women have children and there's
Mm,
financial considerations and what have you. Do you want to talk about the mental healing or journey you've been on as a result
yeah.
of going through this trauma? I've spent some time going to therapy, not directly related to my sexual abuse as a child, but in couples counseling. And
Oh,
and my wife, wanted us to do couples counseling, and we did that for a couple years, and it was an interesting experience. It was a very, I was one of those classic American males, like, oh, I don't want to go talk to these quacks or whatever,
yeah.
and sit on a couch and open myself up and all that stuff. And but I did. We went through it, and it was a very interesting experience. One that I think was very beneficial. I think if you go in with your eyes, with your mind open, right,
Yeah.
and you want to be receptive to the process, I think it can pay a lot of dividends. Do you mind sharing your journey and what that has entailed? And I think
Yeah.
and it's still ongoing. It's an
Oh,
ongoing
yeah.
process for you. Yeah.
Yeah. So the other like little piece of this is, and I say this because it's kind of what pushed me into finally getting the help that I needed, was I developed an eating disorder whenever I was 16. I didn't think I was an eating disorder at the time. Obviously, none of us do whenever we're full blown amongst one. I was bulimic and anorexic in high school, and then um, that just kind of blossomed into like the binging and purging side of it. And so when I was finally seeking out the help that I needed, I was like full blown eating disorder, like binging and purging multiple times a day. I had depression with psychosis. So I was like hearing things. I quite literally was like going crazy. I was losing my mind. I felt like just like, yeah, the whole psychosis, if you know what psychosis is like seeing and hearing crap, and I was at like that level of my mental health and the just total neglect on my side, I guess, to get the help that I needed. But
This
I
is all
just
when you're in high school. This is all that at the
no.
teenage years,
At
or
this point, I'm at the city of Valley Falls.
okay,
So I went that long. I had
okay.
briefly spoken with a counselor. I got 6 free sessions when I was going through the domestic violence thing that I had kind of noted on. But aside from that, I never had seeked out help past that. Um, so while I was at Valley Falls, I was obviously dealing with a lot with the mayor, and my eating disorder was at the worst that it had ever been, and I think my mental health too, with the psychosis being a new a new asset, I guess, or a new thing to happen. And so I reached out to a counselor, and I also reached out to, is it a psychologist? The one that can prescribe medicine.
Psychiatrist, right? Is it?
Psychiatrist.
Yeah,
Okay, I
yeah,
always get
yeah.
those mixed up. The guy that can give me the
I
drugs.
think I'm right. I think I'm
Yeah.
right on that one. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right too. And so I'd reached out to both, and he had started getting me on an antidepressant and an anti-anxiety, and then like an anti. It's used to treat schizophrenia. And so because I was having the psychosis also, and because of the absolute horrible mental health condition I was in, and so I that was the first step I took, and I don't think it would be right of me not to attribute much of that to my sister. She's a paramedic, and so she went into helping people also. And because she's in the medical background that she is, I think she was a very big proponent of me getting the help that I needed.
Amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, I love her dearly. We talk every day. um,
That's amazing.
so I started talking to a counselor. I didn't feel it was like a great fit with her. And I had a bad interaction with the counselor after my suicide attempt because they require you to see one.
Right.
And so that was kind of I went into it with that mental block.
Sort of hang up. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, didn't really have great feelings with her. And I just totally dropped her after like 6 months, maybe. And then I was still seeing the psychiatrist. And so I'm like, I still need a counselor. Do you have any recommendations? This gal's just not doing it for me. And so he recommended me to another lady who was really, really good. And we were only working together for probably about 3 months or so, but we were finally starting to hit all of like the massive trauma from like the sexual abuse and my mother and all of that. And I had told the psychiatrist about the eating disorder. Well, I didn't actually say it was an eating disorder because I really didn't know it was called that at that point. Think I was kind of in denial or lack of knowledge about it. Anyway, and he's like, "You really need to tell your counselor about that." And so I told her, and she did not. Um, she didn't specialize in eating disorders, so she referred me to yet another lady, and that's who I'm with now. And I've been with her for like 2.5 years, and absolutely amazing, phenomenal. The They teach the intuitive eating. I don't know if anyone's heard of that, but
Never heard. I've never heard of that. But
it's beautiful. um, it just craps on diet culture and just what society teaches us now as far as like body positivity and anything. And ironically, with all of my I spent about 2.5 years now. I'm not on any medication anymore, and that's good for some people. Some people need it. I personally didn't need it anymore. I got back to my baseline.
that's
Pers-
awesome.
so anyway, so I've been with her for about 2.5 years now, and the eating disorder, ironically, most people who have a bulimic eating disorder at the younger age is tied to those who have narcissistic parents, and more specifically so narcissistic mothers.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, and so it's amazing how much of my past abuse and trauma was actually leading and connecting to my eating disorder. And so most of the work has been healing all of those traumas, which in as a result has healed the eating disorder. So, yeah.
That's amazing. So, a couple points I want to touch on, because finding a therapist or a counselor is a very difficult thing, right?
Oh my
Because,
gosh,
and
yes.
I think a lot of folks, it's like how much time do you give this person to sort of try to build a rapport and a connection, right? Because it's almost like dating, right? In a
Oh,
crude sense, like you got like, is there a
except you gotta
vibe?
pay to do it.
Yeah, yeah, that's right, that's right.
Tinder's free.
But it's like, hey, are we vibing? It's like you don't want to cut it too short. And
Yeah.
the other thing too is like you also got to be self-aware and honest with yourself. Like, hey, am I running from this person because I'm not liking what they're saying, or are we just not? They're just not really getting me. You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
so you went through like 3 iterations. It sounds like before you kind of got through the process of getting the help that you needed. And so I would just want to remind the folks who are listening that if you're going through something that requires a therapist, that hey, be patient, don't give up on the process just because you might meet the first person and you don't click or you don't vibe with
Yeah.
that individual.
I had always heard that finding a good therapist is like finding a pair of shoes. Like you might have to try on a couple before you find the good one. I think now that I found the good one, I would compare it closer to finding a good pair of jeans. Women, for those who understand that. um,
uh my
yes.
wife, I feel like my wife wears like the same two pairs of jeans. I was like, you got like 20 jeans in the closet, but yet she's like, yeah, but these ones fit the best, like,
Yeah.
or whatever, you know. So
Yeah. So my mom was living with me whenever I was at Valley Falls, and when all of
wait,
just
say that again.
oh yeah, my mother was living with me.
You had
Was
your mom living with you in Valley Falls?
while I was pregnant, working at Valley Falls. Um, it was actually the end of my pregnancy. A week before I had my child is whenever I kicked her out with the help of law enforcement.
So was that
Um,
just you naively trying to make things work and just trying to
she
like,
was gonna be on the streets, and so being the
you felt
person,
obligated?
yeah. S After her being kicked out, I no longer I have not talked to her since. So it's going on 2 years. I haven't talked to my mom, and I don't intend to.
Good,
I
good.
needed to cut that, string, and I'm glad I did, but,
You know,
uh
I've seen so many people, man, this conversation is really going off in some weird paths, right? And I might offend some people with this, and I don't mean to, but this is I'm gonna just share my truth, right?
yeah.
As the
You
saying
speak
goes,
your
you know.
truth, girl.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. You know, is you know, I'm a white guy, right? And my stepdad was Hispanic, and I grew up with a bunch of Hispanics because the church that we went through was geared towards rehabilitating drug addicts and gangbangers, and it was
Mhm.
primarily a Hispanic demographic. And you know, I would joke with my friends. I go, "Hey, I'm white. I see my family on Thanksgiving and Christmas, and that's about it. Like that's how
Yeah.
we roll, you know." And whereas the Hispanics are like, "Man," I'm like, "You guys are at the park every fucking weekend. Like, how do you even afford to even buy all these get like, you know, all these birthdays and the jump houses?" I'm like, "I couldn't even afford to pay for all these gifts for the
Oh
like all
my
the ninos and like what is going
yeah,
on? You know what I mean? You guys
yeah.
are always doing something, right?"
Every weekend.
And you know, and so big family's a huge thing, obviously, in Hispanic culture, and it's one, and I have a lot of respect for it for sure. But something that I've always talked about a little bit too is there's a blessing and a curse to that because you know you went through this horrible experience with your mother, and yet you still took her in and was trying to help out and make things work just because you felt that obligation, familial obligation, even though you'd been
Mhm.
wronged in so many ways. And I see that time and time again with a lot of families where individuals don't cut the ties because there's a blood connection, right? And there's whole, you know, blood's thicker than water and their
Yeah.
family and whatever. And, you know, I'm like, fuck that noise. Like, you know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
I flip the switch on you, you're out of my life. It's like, if you're not
Period.
like, yeah. And I think more people should be like that personally. It's like, hey, these, just because you're related with all their drama and their trauma and their bullshit and you know, it's like,
Yeah.
why are you going to subject yourself to going down to their level or having to deal with their BS because just because they're family, you know what I mean? It's like, they're just basically a parasitic relationship. They're just taking from you and offering you nothing of value. And obviously I'm not talking about turning away from someone in their time of need, but you know, I'm talking about not turning away from someone who's not harmed you and not done anything negative to you. Like if people are not good to you, then cut them out of your life. You know what I mean? And anyway, that's just my little sidebar rant. But yeah, I was, I like to talk about how the difference between white families and Hispanic
Yeah.
families when I was growing up in Southern California. Yeah. So,
I
but
totally know what you mean. Yeah. I see them sometimes multiple times a week.
it's a lot, you know?
Yeah.
And
I'm almost
then
tired of seeing you.
oh, but the blessing, the curse, you know, when you need them and you need help, they're there, you know, and
Yeah.
it's you're never alone, right? You're never
That's true.
alone.
Yeah.
And I do think there's a lot of differences in sort of the cultural differences in that. I think a lot of I think it also talks honestly. I think that's also why there's a higher prevalence of suicide with white Americans than there are with Hispanics and what have you. So anyway, that's a really weird segment. I don't know sure how I got down that rabbit hole, but
I think we've
you
been through
know,
a few.
yeah, yeah. So, you know, the one final thing I kind of wanted to hit on here, Audrey, because we've covered a lot of ground, is that you're talking about a very personal situation in your life, obviously, and you're talking about it in the context of it being very recent.
Mhm.
And we kind of started this conversation in some ways about, you know, lack of privacy and how, you know, public facing this position is, especially in small town Kansas and what have you. Are you concerned about being out there and having this being weaponized and used against you? Because, there's always that I feel like there's always that concern that, someone's going to listen to a podcast or look at a social media post or whatever and try to use something like that against you. And I'm just wondering, one, are you worried about that? And two, if you are, what compelled you to be so open and vulnerable on the program today? Because you've obviously opened yourself up to the world. You bared your soul.
Yeah. I think sometimes talking about mental health, at least that's how I think of it. It sometimes feels like you're standing up on a stage just butt naked.
Right.
Uh, um, and I don't. Today, I haven't felt like that. I I don't. If people judge me, I guess that's their decision to judge me. It's sad that that's how you want to judge me because most of these things were out of my control, and my mental health or the decline in it, and all the PTSD and the depression and anxiety and the eating disorder, those were um those were because of the things that happened to me that were out of my control.
Right.
Like those were results of it. If you go jump off a tree and break your leg, I'm not going to judge you because you have to go get a cast. Like I might judge you slightly because you jumped off a
Because
tree,
you
but
jumped out of a tree, right?
yeah, but and I think that's how mental health should be. And I if someone's gonna look at me and judge me because of what I've said today, that's unfortunate for them. I'm gonna continue the rest of my day and the rest of my life, and I'm not going to. And I'm gonna continue to get up on this pedestal because I'm more afraid of not saying anything and not being able to help someone and prevent somebody taking that suicide attempt and they're not as lucky and it was successful for them, or not getting that help and now they've turned to drugs or some other form of unhealthy coping. Again, I think it's scarier for me in that sense that I could be helping someone and I'm choosing not to because of the fear of what people might think of me.
Yeah, yeah.
Um
Well,
so
I
no.
gotta tell you, Audrey, if they're gonna judge you, they should judge you as an absolute badass. I mean, that's what you know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
to use the tree analogy, it's not you jumping out of a tree and hurting yourself. It's like your mom throwing you out of the tree and you getting hurt. Like why are you gonna get blamed or
Yeah.
it's it's interesting. A little sidebar, then I guess we'll kind of wrap up on this because this is something that's always fascinated me about American culture. And that is, we talk about, again, going back to what I said earlier about protecting the children and taking care of our children and giving them the best and helping them become, good upstanding adults and what have you, right? It's like we have this crazy perspective where Audrey Guzman or Joe Turner, we can go through these crazy experiences as a kid, right?
Mhm.
Absolute horrible experiences where anybody would say, oh, anybody, any normal human beings is going to look down upon us with, sympathy and
Y-
empathy and all that other stuff, right?
Yeah.
And then the minute you turn 18, it's like, tough shit, buddy. You're an adult now, so you just
Yep.
go deal with it, right?
Hope you don't get into drugs. Try to
Yeah,
stay out of
yeah.
jail. Yeah.
Oh my god, she's seeing a psychiatrist or she's got,
Yeah.
it's like, well, what do you mean? Like up until 18, I was actually just getting completely like, screwed over by life. And
Yeah.
then now I'm trying to deal with it as an adult and you want to like assign some sort of negative value or perspective on me because I'm doing X, Y, and Z to try to
Yeah.
recover and rebuild my life. You know what I'm saying? It's just a
Yeah.
weird deal how we view adults and children when they migrate or children when they transition from being a minor into an adulthood,
Yeah, or I think mental health in general, like it's not frowned upon, or not. I'm gonna say frowned upon. It's not judged heavily whenever you go to the doctor because you have a cold and you're physically sick. But if
Right,
you're mentally sick, which I think is more important because I don't know, there's a whole lot you can't do without your brain functioning, like basics, basics like
right.
breathing. If my brain's not functioning, um, I think it's more. I would almost argue it's more important that your mental health should be taken care of. And so, why would we judge if they're going to go see a doctor to take care of their mental health or a professional to get the therapy they need? I'm not judging you when you go to the chiropractor and you get the therapy through that, or when you
Right.
go get a massage. Why would we do that? Why? And that's I think we as a culture should get better. And I think part of that is me doing what I'm doing right now and not being afraid to talk about it.
Well, I love it. I love it. Thank you for being on the program, Audrey. You are an inspiration, and thank you for being so vulnerable. And obviously, by way of you sharing your story, you also helped me share my story a little bit. And I'm hoping some people got some value out of this. Hopefully, like I said, not hopefully, because unfortunately, there's going to be individuals out there who are going through some very terrible situations, and I don't wish that on anybody. But hopefully, anyone who's going through such a situation was able to listen to your story and get some empowerment out of it or some encouragement, and they can take some steps to help themselves. And also, I'm gonna throw this out there too, like if you aren't personally going through something, but you're listening to this podcast and you think somebody else is going through something, maybe step up. Try to be that Debbie. Is it Metzger? Debbie
Yeah,
Metzger.
Debbie. Yeah.
Try to step up and see what you can do to help that person and be that nudge. Because it's tough to act when you're in the heat of battle and you sort of are going through all the different traumatic experiences that one might go through as a child or a teenager or a young adult. It's tough to act. You're paralyzed by fear, and as you said
Hmm.
before, the uncertainties of the unknown, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Joe, I don't have any problem if they're too afraid, if they just need someone to understand or vent or relate with, I'm here because I'd rather be a listening ear and then instead of here of not being able to get the help that you needed. So,
Awesome. What I'll do is
yeah.
I'll put your LinkedIn page in the show notes, as well as maybe I'll do an email because I don't want to put spam bots on you or whatnot. But
Yeah.
we'll get some contact information out there for you so people can reach out to you. And thank you for sharing your story, Audrey.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. It's been a blast. And I'm so glad that we finally got to connect on here.
Love it. Love it. All right. I'm Joe Turner. This is the City Manager Unfiltered podcast, a podcast for city managers and other public sector executives. It is the most influential local government podcast in America, racking up over 200 ratings and reviews on Apple in the first year. And also, we are at 100,000 downloads literally right now as I'm recording this episode, although it'll be released in several weeks. So thank you all for your support over the last year plus. I appreciate it. If you have not hit the follow, subscribe button, please do so today. And if you've not shared the podcast with a friend or a peer, please do so today. I would appreciate it. Thank you and have a great day.